started here, and anyone who can join us afterwards will on. Feel free to input any questions, comments in the chat as this webinar unfolds. And yeah, I'm looking forward to our discussion today. I'll start introducing myself. I am Democracy, Rights, and Governance Lead here at REWE, Sam Wallenberg. I work on the development team with REWE, investigating, a lot of similar research topics and topics of interest as we'll be discussing today, which is global meaningfulness. And what we're mostly focusing on is his recent work. I have Peterson with me here, and they recently worked with REWE to assess a multi-country study around global meaningfulness, as well as a tandem product, which was also on work. And we're just going to explore various measures that they included in that, some philosophical that their organization and their research, as well as then just talk about some key highlights, pull in hopefully some topical events, and yeah, I encourage all of you as well to chime in with let's keep them as questions, but I'd love to hear anecdotes as well about where meaningfulness has changed in the last couple of years in your life and how that relates to work, how you kind of marry those two life. So Nicholas, yourself and started with Balloon.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for the introduction, and thank you for hosting this webinar. We're excited about launching this webinar and being able to talk a little bit about something that's very dear to us and something that we've been working on for quite a few years now in making reality. So my name is Nicholas Cable. I am the COO of Voluntas. We're a Danish founded consulting company with a very specific purpose of wanting to realize human potential. We believe that human potential is a better way of looking at individuals than human resources, as every human being, by the virtue of being born, has potential. And so our stated purpose as a company and in everything we do is to try to understand and dissect to the best degree possible what meaningfulness is, how it's lived, how it's operationalized, and how it can become a tool for supporting organizations and society in underpinning the ambitions of people to live lives that are as meaningful as possible. We're, as I said, founded and based in Copenhagen, Denmark, but have offices in 7 different countries now, and work with a variety of partners, both corporate, for-profit clients, global companies, NGOs, international organizations, and academic institutions. So in reality, we see ourselves as a laboratory of trying to understand the anatomy of meaningfulness in everything we do. Yeah.
And and just if you want to just discuss a bit more about how these reports have come up. This is the 5th or 3rd year that you've been doing this, and then also the inclusion of the new index in addition to meaningfulness at work report. So yeah.
Some of the work that we do as part of the company, and also why we see us as a laboratory, is we, for the 4th year in a row now, have developed a global report on meaningfulness at large. And so we have what we call a Center for Applied Meaningfulness, and within this center we do a lot of research on our own. We've now been working since 2015 to try to understand what meaningfulness is, what drive meaningfulness in organizations, but as I said, also in societies at large. And so it has propelled us to create an annual report that measures meaningfulness globally. For the first 3 iterations of it, we had a very and more narrow focus on meaningfulness at work. That's sort of the arena where we've been traditionally focused. But this year we have made a split, and both will be coming out with a global meaningfulness index. So in reality, creating an index that we believe is a better measure of well-being in societies by focusing on meaningfulness, but at the same time also having the meaningfulness at work focus. So we're coming out with two reports now, one specifically focusing on how meaning is created and generated and retained in workplaces, and another one, and which we'll be talking specifically about today, a global one that looks at how meaning is felt, perceived, and lived in societies at large. And that is where our ambition has come towards establishing an index, a global index that allows for an alternative to some of the more traditional measures that we've seen, such as the World Happiness Index or the Human Development Index or other indices that are currently used for policy dialogues and for discussions around what constitutes societal well-being and progress. And we'll get a little bit more into the methodology around it, but the ambition is to create an alternative for how to measure well-being in societies.
Fantastic. And just curious if you've seen the reception of this discussion around investigating alternative measures to social and economic well-being. Have you seen that evolve over the last 8 or 9 years you've been working on this, consulting with organizations? Do you see receptivity change, or do you see maybe any pandemic-related shifts, or where people are actually gravitating to this much more as a valuable metric?
No, we've seen significant change. As I said, we have had an initial focus on measuring the level of meaningfulness in organizations, trying to really understand what is it that drives meaningfulness, and very much based on some of the findings that we've seen, where we see very strong correlations between levels of meaningfulness at a workplace and stress, levels of meaningfulness at a workplace and staff retention, innovation, and I would say in very early days, so late, so 18, 19, 20, it was not always so well received, but we have seen a significant uptick in focus on the social sustainability and the social impact of companies at large, but of course also in general in societies, of policies being implemented. And here the mental well-being, the perceived well-being of individuals in a workplace, but also societies at large, has really taken a significant focus. So I think we are seeing a mega trend towards having this as a focus, and also having it as a focus of moving away from the more econometric way of measuring well-being in organizations and societies. So yes, we've seen a trend towards this.
Fantastic. And it's nice to know it's not all, pandemic related, that there was this kind of groundswell that was going, and then in many other factors of life as well, the pandemic sorts of accelerates, where companies and societies are now even able to turn their attention or seeing the need. Oh yeah, super fascinating. Well, I will then quickly just introduce ReWe's component to this, and that was in the sampling and survey methodology. So the delivery of these key measures across these 6 variables. ReWe market research and generally, surveying company is quite a unique web intercept methodology. This is what sets us apart a bit from random digit dialing, where you typically have surveyors calling people on their mobile devices or landlines, or face-to-face interviewing or traditional methods. What we do is intercept people across hundreds of thousands of various entry points that are constantly rotating at any point. So in a global study across 10 plus countries like we're doing here, it's really an accelerated way that we can get a sampling frame that's within a time period across all of these countries, as well as reduce kind of some of those biases. So once a web user lands on one of those web intercept entry points for us, we automatically validate that they're coming from the region that the survey is We also can validate the language. We do presented language based on the geographic region of that country, and then people have the option to select their own language. If first language is a secondary general country's national languages. We also have a privacy policy right at the front of that, and which basically allows people to answer anonymously. And so we don't collect personally identified information, which also differs from more traditional polling and surveying methodologies. And with that, we're able to basically engender a bit of trust that we're really truly interested in the responses that our survey participants provide, and not necessarily in the data behind their responses, and do collect demographic information, age and gender, but that really is the only personal data that we request, and then just allow people to engage the survey from there. And we're constantly collecting this data in real time and presenting it in dashboards for people to assess those values. So what really does this methodology solve for as opposed to those traditional methods? One is the more quiet voices. So I think Nicholas was discussing, we want to know the various contours of meaningfulness, and if we're selecting from a sub-demographic, those really eager to answer their phone, which not many people are doing these days anymore, especially those 35, and myself, you don't often have people answering the phone, even when it's a friend or family calling. So with the web intercept methodology, we find that we get a lot of younger respondents. We get people who aren't necessarily super politically engaged, which is good, because one thing we're seeing in even political polling or measures of societal happiness, that the people who tend to opt into these traditional survey methods have a specific opinion, demographic, or belief that is essentially a sub-selection of folks. So we like doing a bit more smattering and getting people on their devices, mobile, etc. And anonymity does really help that engagement. One thing my work as democracy, human rights, and governance lead is that we're asking people in authoritarian countries values. What do they see as their trust in institutions? We want to reflect back onto them that those responses will be securely kept and not used to potentially jeopardize their health. And kind of the key thing that I think ties into what Voluntis is asking here is sometimes the interview or the social desirability bias that can come from different survey methodologies are not present within the reread. That's because there's a face or a voice on the other end of the line asking you these. And so one thing we find in study from Bangladesh recently, actually, that Rohingya refugees provided different measures of responses when Bangladeshi interviewers were asking them than Rohingya interviewers were asking them. That was around how satisfied they are with their humanitarian needs, etc. So it just shows you how even the ethnicity of the interviewer or the voice on the other and the implications that we apply to those can actually change the responses that people get. And so we truly think that using this method for this meaningful index, we're really getting at the heart of what people truly not mediated by societal expectations. So yeah, that's just a bit of what Riwi's component of this survey was to the index. So here, Nicholas is going to provide us with some definitions and a bit of the philosophical underpinnings that have shaped Voluntis's research in this area for many years. So yeah, Nicholas, please.
If you can actually go a slide back, because I think one of the key aspects that's important for us to illustrate and that really underpins our philosophy is what we see as an important distinction between satisfaction, happiness, and meaningfulness. We have all been part of satisfaction surveys, or we've seen the World Happiness Index, but for us, and the reason why we have a significant focus on meaningfulness is because we believe that there are some very significant distinctions between these three concepts, both in their temporality, but also in their content. And allow me to just dwell on some of these distinctions in order for us to better understand how we see meaningfulness as differentiating itself and therefore being a better measure of well-being at large. So when thinking of satisfaction, it's very much defined as the fulfillment of a need. So if you're hungry, you eat, then you're satisfied. If you are thirsty and you drink, well, then you're satisfied. If you are hoping for a promotion at work and you get the promotion, you're satisfied. But it's very much tied to the immediate fulfillment of the need that you have. So in that sense, it's tied to a certain moment. And I think it's fair to say we've also all tried that as immediately as soon as that need has been satisfied, well, then you are looking for the next thing to satisfy you in the future. Happiness, on the other hand, is the culmination of feelings. It's a sensation of being in a unique space where you are with your loved ones, where you are feeling fulfilled. And as such, it's an extraordinary moment in life. And that's also very much tied to a moment in time. So the temporal aspect of happiness is also very much temporal. And it's also an extraordinary sensation. So that in itself is semantically impossible. If happiness is the extraordinary moment in life, well then of course it cannot be something you strive to feel continuously, because then it would become the ordinary. And so by the virtue of being extraordinary, it cannot be the ordinary. The way we see meaningfulness differentiate itself is that it actually transcends the temporal nature and aspect of satisfaction and happiness. So meaningfulness is something that looks both into your past, into your present, and into the future, and evaluates your sensation and your feeling meaning in what you do and where you are. And what it also does is that it caters for the capacity of feeling a diverse set of feelings. And that's also very much unlike satisfaction and happiness. So you can feel, you cannot be satisfied and dissatisfied at the same time. You cannot be happy and unhappy at the same time, but you can do something that is dissatisfying to you while still finding it meaningful. You can be unhappy, but still find what you're doing meaningful. And as such, it allows for that diverse set of feelings that creates resilience in individuals, but also in societies. I know personally that when my 2-year-old daughter wakes up at 3 a.m. in the morning and I am tired and I know that I have to wake up in 4 hours because I have to get her to kindergarten, I'm not satisfied and I'm not happy, but I still take her up and make her stop crying, because I know that it provides the preconditions for her to become the human being that I want her to be, feeling loved. And so it's meaningful to me. And so measuring and operationalizing how to best harness meaningfulness as a concept in organizations, but also societies, we believe is a much better measure of well-being, because it creates resilience. And we believe also preempt some of the challenges we are seeing in current day, and we'll come back to some of those. But of course, what's meaningful to me might not be meaningful to you, Sam, or to anyone listening. And so it's a relative concept. And so what we've done and what we've been working on since 2015 is to break meaningful down into some parameters of how to measure it. So we don't just ask people, do you find your life meaningful? That in itself could be a measure, but of course it would be very relative what people would then be answering on the basis of. So we have, through academic partnerships, also with all the data that we've been collecting, we've now done more than 100,000 surveys across companies and societies. We've seen and tried to distill drivers that we see have a very and most significant correlation with a sensation of meaningfulness in life. And so what we see is that life is meaningful when it has a purpose. So here we are not just talking about the capital P purpose that you know, for example, if you're in a company, what the aim of the company is, but also the lowercase p and lowercase purpose. So do I know why I'm doing what I'm doing as an individual? It's meaningful when you receive a clear guidance from leadership. So someone is guiding you in the direction that you're expected to go. It's meaningful when you feel a strong sense of community and belonging. So feeling part of a group where people care for each other, but also when you feel a strong sense of personal growth. So feeling that you're on a day-to-day basis, you can see over time that you evolve and develop the potential that you have, the unique potential that you have as an individual. And so what we do, and what we've also done in this specific study, is to break meaningful down into these four drivers, and then in reality operationalize those drivers into questions that we've asked people. And as I said, the actual study will be launched next week, where there will also be a more thorough walk through the methodology. But of course, I would also be happy to answer any questions that there might be. But if you take the next slide, it really comes from the what we call the great paradox of our time, which in reality is that we live in a time and a day and age of unprecedented wealth. We've never had as much resources as we have right now globally. We've never been higher on the Human Development Index scale globally. We've seen an unprecedented growth in economic wealth, GDP, over the past 10, 15 years. And that's a global phenomenon. But at the same time, we see significant challenges, societies across the world with impacts of mental illness, such as stress, anxiety, depression. In all corridors of life, we see, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later as well, significant issues related to retention of staff in organizations. We see it when it comes to stress. We see it when it comes to depression. WHO is estimating that up to 300 million people currently suffers from depression globally. So it's an astounding number when you, at the same time, on all conventional indicators, see us being better off than ever. So if all the current indices that we're looking at, being it the Human Development Index, being it the World Happiness Index, scores us very high and says that and are in reality showing us that we have never been better off, well then how come we see all these studies also talking about challenges? So we just see that as a paradox, and that's very much also what propelled us towards developing a methodology for measuring something that we believe is a better measure of societal well-being, namely the meaningfulness. So that's really the genesis of why we believe that meaningfulness is a better measure. And again, this is the first time that we're doing a global study on meaningfulness in societies. We've interviewed with Rivi as partner more than 18,000 people across 24 countries. So we are just representing the data and are trying to understand what this means to our conception of societal progress and well-being. But we do believe that something else is needed, that conventional measures of societal well-being are just not connecting the dots that need to be connected in order for us to preempt and to counter some of these challenges we're seeing in societies. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for that foundation, philosophical as well as theoretical, and then backed by, essentially it sounds like a pretty rigorous investigation to develop these measures and to ensure that what you're asking isn't, like you say, fixed in time, or actually expands upon the pretty vast kind of cognitive, diverseness of humans. And as we kind of provide responses, to these measures, that we can actually take a step back, and as someone who's done through the survey as a test, yeah, I really found that measures you have developed are ones that really help you think in a variety of different directions in your life, not purely just, your work life or just purely like your home. You really are, intermeshing the two and getting to the core. So then let's start looking at what some of these results are showing on a per country basis. And so these are the 24 countries in the index. And as Nick just described, we've asked all of these, ranging from between, I think, like 500 to about 700, in all of these various. And so before we kind of dive into some of the more disaggregated findings, and I want to just give a quick takeaway here, Nicholas, in terms of, was this surprising to you when you saw these countries fall on this skew, or were there, points in your research and in your investigation of this issue for so many years where this really kind of made sense intuitively?
Well, I think a very first takeaway when seeing this is obviously a need for reflection. I think what really stands out is, of course, that it completely turns everything on its head when it comes to more conventional measures of well-being. So if you compare to any other existing studies we've seen, any other existing indices that are currently being used, this is not a perfect opposite, but close to being a turn of the tables in terms of where countries are placed. And so it definitely propels us to reflect on what that means to us. It's not completely new, I would say, because it is something that we've seen also in studies showing that the strive towards satisfaction and happiness, as we've just now had the very brief, more theoretical discussion, but what we also very much see in the more human development world, or the developed world, that is something that is very much in the forefront of how to define a life that's worth living. It is to be satisfied. It's about being happy. And again, if you strive towards being happy all the time, well, then the likelihood is actually that it will lead you to become stressed and depressed, because it is the extraordinary, because it's not the ordinary. And so I do think that the immediate reflection is, of course, well, this is super interesting for us to see that this is how the table aligns, and how it then relates to existing indices that we would normally look at. It's very clear to us that there are things that we in the Western world can learn from some of these countries. And again, we don't believe that this is the perfect measure. We hope to learn. Again, we see ourselves as a laboratory of meaningfulness. We hope to learn from this as well. But there's definitely some insights that will allow us to deep dive into countries as well, to better understand what drives meaning in these countries.
Fascinating. And yeah, and just for those watching who might not be able to see the text, at a small on the side, the kind of top 5 countries are India, Mexico, and Ethiopia. And the kind of lowest 5 countries are Germany, the UK, Netherlands, and Sweden. And so just looking at those juxtapositions by pretty wide margins, is the big numbers are showing on this slide, almost, a 2.5 point skew, or skew between kind of Sweden and India. And so that really is, like you said, a cause for pause and reflection, but also I think helps create a bit of salience in what this measure is unique in, what it's defining, and what it's actually collecting. So in looking at some of those kind of unique comparisons, what we have here is the Global Meaningfulness Index, and compared to the Human Development Index on the y-axis. So what we're really seeing is actually a negative correlation. And so, Nicholas, you want to talk a little bit more about, as you map this out? Yeah, and then I've got a kind of few questions. So why do you think we're seeing this inverse correlation?
The first thing when seeing the list, of course, we wanted to see, well, how can we explain this? Well, are there any current indices that we can try to pair it with to see how it would fall out? And it was relatively early clear that there is actually a relatively both strong correlation, but also significant of nature in terms of the inverse relationship between Human Development Index and the Global Meaningfulness Index. And so I think a big part of it is, of course, that what the Human Development Index focuses on is very much objective measures of well-being, school enrollment, basic service delivery. Again, GDP also plays a significant role. And we are not saying that all these are not important. What we're saying is that by having a very narrow focus on these objective factors, we're neglecting something that is playing a significant role in the well-being of individuals in the society. So I think what it shows us is definitely that what defines well-being and part of our philosophical underpinning is also that really the strong and long-lasting relationships of individuals, the belonging to communities, the sense of belonging, the sense of you feeling a trust in your leadership in community, that those are measures that will need to be taken into consideration, and that doesn't come from purely economic development. Rather, we actually see that with economic development, there is probably a negative influence on how long and how deep and how lasting your relationships are. We have seen a lot of focus on social media, on the fleeing relationship that you build, on the lack of depth of those. And so clearly there is something there that economic growth does not provide for. And I believe that that's something that we've seen in other studies as well. So really looking for something where striving for the extraordinary to become ordinary is not the norm, but when you accept that the primary perspective on having a life that's meaningful is actually developing relationships that are lasting and deep and long, that provides for a healthy society, that's something to take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting kind of sub-analysis of, is our current corporate or economic system set up to purely have a GDP based or economic value associated with it, and once those are achieved, the satisfaction is very fleeting. Like you said, in looking at that, it's, you can be satisfied briefly. Oh, I got this promotion, great. But what does that actually create in the broader contours of my life? And I think this is really showing that, like you said, having economic measures are great with some societal, direction. But if we want to address the mental health issues that we're seeing here, if we want to address the just skyrocketing rates of anxieties and of depression, well, then maybe societies and maybe corporations might actually want to focus a bit more on fostering that belonging. Or one thing I think that came out of the pandemic was the remote work capabilities that have increased. You're now in your communities a little longer. You're not purely just in the office 5 days a week and come back to your communities on the weekends. You're actually able to create some more of that belonging, as you're doing errands around the house during the week or things along those lines. And so I just really like how the index really exemplifies what we're measuring now and how that might not actually get to what we find as meaningfulness in life.
No, I think it's what is it that we're aiming for as a societal outcome? Well, it is a well-being of individuals, and it is to preempt some of these mental health issues that we're seeing. I mean, we've seen significant also post-COVID challenges of workplaces. We've talked a lot about the great attrition. We see that up to 40% of everyone is currently considering leaving their job for another job. So it is just something that's very, very significant. So the younger generations, and especially post COVID, are not interested in just swapping their time for financial benefits. There's something else, and that's where it's really important as societies, as political leaders, to also have a focus on, well, how do we create the preconditions for societies that allow for a much stronger sense of belonging, of leadership. So the trust in political leaders is also important. And then that is really, I think, showing in this correlation.
Fantastic. Well, to disaggregate these results a little, and I think kind of hone in a bit on what age demographics might be kind of most cause for concern, especially if we're looking at, some of those health-related issues. And yeah, so I just want to kind of dive into a bit of the under 25. I think Generation Z or Zoomers might still be the correct term. I know there's some overlaps with other generations, but what we're actually starting to see is that, as the quote here in the bottom, significant differences exist in the sense of meaning felt across generations, and young people below 25 score 8% lower on general sense of meaning compared to those 55 and above. And so, yeah, what do you think are some of these unique challenges we see to, those below 25 getting a sense of meaning, getting a sense of value, both in their, work experience and then how that relates to their personal?
Well, I think there's a significant lack of leadership at large, and specifically, I mean, it goes across all. So leadership is by far the lowest scoring indicator or driver of meaning, and we'll get back to that a little bit. But I do think that there's something there, and especially for the younger generations, feeling that they're lacking a human interaction that allows for them to feel a sense of belonging. And that, so we see that very much in workplaces. We also see it in societies, that it's really about the humanness of the interactions that you have. We have a big focus as volunteers on what we call humanistic capitalism. So in reality, having a focus on not just capitalism as a system, because it is there, but moving from a capitalist system to a humanistic capitalist system where the morality, not just legality, but morality plays a role. So the value of the money earned also depends on how you earn them. And we see that is also really something that in the younger generation is sought after. So, for example, the DE&I, we see that close to 3/4, especially of the younger generations, are actively looking for policies in companies when deciding where to work. We see the social connectedness being a significant driver of meaning in the youth, or the Generation Z, as you say, and so really having that focus on what generates meaning for the younger generation, rather than how they can have the immediate satisfaction of needs. I think that's what we see, and the awareness around the willingness to swap the one life that you've been given for something that is not creating meaning in your life. That has become something that people are much more aware of, and especially in the younger generation, which demands or puts new demands to policymakers, to employers at large, that you cannot just satisfy the immediate needs by either creating state subsidies or policies that allow for immediate needs satisfaction, or paying more money, but you actually have to look at what it is that drives the meaning in the lives of these people, and that's really where the sense of purpose, why, and again, that's why I distinguish between the capital P purpose and the lowercase purpose. Why am I doing what I'm doing? How does that relate to the overall purpose of me? How do I grow from this? That is something that we see much more pronounced than previously.
It's very interesting too, and being kind of in the tech adjacent industry, it also is pretty salient to me when the attraction to trying to get meaningful in life is focused on material things. Let's say ping pong tables, or let's say open bars and things like that. That's a nice perk, but that didn't bring people back to the office. That did not, you now have your biggest tech companies in the world trying to shoehorn employees back into the office because, like I think you said, the belonging, the community aspect isn't met by simply, the material goods you can offer, the amount of free beer, or the amount of, foosball or ping pong you have. And so that's really interesting, and I like to hear that in the workplaces you're discussing with, you really drill down a bit further past those kind of cheap perks, let's say, into like, no, what are some policies that they can look at? What are some words you put on paper and values that you instill in as a company, and how can that be attractive? I think that's a really important key point for a lot of workplaces.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely something we see at large in companies, but also societies. It's important to have that focus and to really actively look at it. So obviously, start measuring, well, what is meaningful to people in this society? How do we then cater and create policies or a workplace culture that underpins an increase of that meaning? So it's something that people and policymakers at large will have to actively engage in.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get into the last kind of key data point here before we turn it over to some Q&A. But yeah, we'll just start with the guidance and the leadership measure. And so, yeah, Nicholas, how do you see that, the 45% of individuals who lack leadership in their life, what do you see as something that let's go with societies can do first? Because I really like that point. I feel like a lot of the point has been on workplaces we've discussed so far. But let's see what can societies do, because leadership is easy, I think, in a corporate structure where you have a boss or you have a direct report, and then a manager, helps you feel purpose. So yeah, I'm just curious as to what you think and what companies and countries you're working with, how they're saying more all of society policies for this guidance and leadership.
Yeah, well, I think a big thing that we see, well, obviously the underlying point is that at large we see leadership in societies as being the lacking driver of a sense of meaning in life, and so that goes at large. But what really is lacking is the sense of trust in leaders taking and creating policies that allow you as an individual to fulfill the potential that you have, and that policies put in place are there to support you in realizing your potential and achieving the purpose that you have. And that for me, I think is a significant takeaway, that there's just that people do not feel that the leaders that they have in their lives provide or take decisions that are catered towards the realization of individual potential amongst the constituencies of society. So that goes for political leadership, but also local communities. That sense is just not there. And so definitely a focus on trying to instill and show that that you can trust in the leaders that you have in your life in society. So the trust building mechanisms or measures, but also just the show of decisions being taken towards furthering the actual realization of potential in societies. That those are the primary areas where we see low scores being illustrated. And so when we engage, so we work with UN agencies, as I said, INGOs, also IOs at large, Sudan, which have currently seen significant conflict, Libya, India, Ukraine, and other countries. It is really, how do you create the preconditions for that to be a social contract that's strong enough for you to feel trust or build trust between leaders and their constituents, and clearly that's currently lacking at large.
Yeah, no, that definitely overlaps too with a lot of my work in the democracy realm. And what we're seeing as a pretty promising approach is one of participatory democracies. So where you can randomly select large samples of citizens and have them debate a policy issue. There's a lot of countries that are now actually devoting budget resources. So whatever those participatory democracies, and basically citizen-based democracies, whatever they vote on, you actually have some funding behind that. You can implement some of those decisions. I know France just went through one on assisted dying. So for those with end of life kind of difficulties, and that really touches on, I think, what you're saying as a bit more agency, by actually involving people, not just having participation in society be an election every 4 years. You're actually, have a chance to debate these issues on a per basis and not just to let a leader make all the rest of the decisions.
No, I think that's a big part of it. So participation, because you therefore also feel that you have a purpose in that community, in that group. But I also feel a lot of it again boils down to the whole being human. So really having leaders also question themselves. Why should people trust in me? Why should people be led by me? What am I doing to actively engage in understanding and communicating the purpose of the constituents of my decisions? That we see lacking.
Very, very, very interesting. All right, well, let's end with a statement I know that you wanted to include in this, and it overlaps a bit with Riwi's mission. So yeah, I'll let you finish off with this and any last points you have.
Yeah, no, for me, I think the main point is that we believe that for all the measures that are out there, this should be seen as something that really complements. We do not see this taking over from a Human Development Index, but we do see that all existing indices lacks something that needs to be measured because of the paradox that I mentioned. Clearly, there are dots that are not being connected when we see so significant challenges when it comes to stress, anxiety, depression, while being wealthier than we've ever been. And so we need to step away from the world of legality, saying, well, we're doing all the right things, we're following the rules, to the world of morality, where we are actually also measuring the social impact based on how much meaning we create in other people's lives. And that is that's our aim, to support in developing words for that and measures for operationalize that into something that's actually concrete.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it in that statement very much to me overlaps as well, and I think this is why Valentis and Riwi kind of found each other, and why we work so well together, is that same thing. By focusing on quiet voices, or focusing on not always the most vocal or the most prominent in society, we can actually get more of those meaningful measures, and we can see where it's not just those most economically endowed or politically endowed, but we're actually being able to assess across a much more diverse sample of people, and seeing the diversity in meaning. And from that, the results show that it's not purely about our economic or corporate success, and really it matters a lot on what other aspects of our life are also fulfilled.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, we're close to the end of our hour here. I haven't seen any questions in the chat. If anyone feels the need to insert one now, please ask away. Otherwise, we were chatting kind of before this, and Nicholas mentioned that the report will be released on June 7th, I believe. And
yeah, we'll be launching it in India next week. We thought that was a fitting location now that India is the highest scorer of the Global Meaningfulness Index, but also because we opened an office in Mumbai last year, and are of course also eager to better understand what is it that drives meaningfulness in India, to see if there are key takeaways that we can use to to advise other policymakers.
Perfect. Okay, I actually have one question came in. Thanking us for the webinar and society. Oh, well, thank you so much, Nanda. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think it comes out that we both enjoy the work that we do and the measures and the metrics that come out of the work that we engage with. And I think we'll both agree that it's important work. So thanks again. And if we have your email address along with your registration here, we'll try and send out a link to that report as well when it's released, so you can dive fully into the results. Great. Well, thank you, Nicholas. This was fantastic chatting with you, and thank you for sharing these results.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Well, take care, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.